and the Liberal Party arguing about whose power plan is worse. 940,000 Nova Scotians know the NDP plan has driven up their rates by 25%. The residents of every other province and state where the Liberals' ideas have been tried have seen their power rates go up by 30 to 50%. All we conclude over here, Mr. Speaker, when they criticize each other is that they are both right. So let's talk about something positive, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about something positive. Yesterday, there was an announcement in Goldboro about a new LNG export terminal. Welcome news for that area of Nova Scotia and indeed for all Nova Scotia to see a development of that size. Mr. Speaker, over the years, Nova Scotians have become tired of watching their natural gas. They have been tired of watching natural gas piped from our province to other places where it's used to generate electricity and lower power rates. They are going to be equally concerned about watching gas now flowing in the other direction and then exported overseas. So we have an opportunity. We have a 100-year supply of natural gas that may well be flowing the other way into our province, Nova Scotia, so let's not let that opportunity go by. My question to the Premier, will he grasp this moment and allow Muskrat Falls to be compared to all of the other alternatives for generating cheap, clean electricity, including natural gas?
Here.
This will be a complete comparison. I would just say this, though. I think Nova Scotians have learned their lesson, or at least many of them have, obviously not the members of that caucus, but it was the policy of the Conservative Party that chained us to fossil fuels like coal in the past. And at the time, the reason why that was done was because coal was relatively cheap as a fuel source. The problem, of course, with fossil fuels is that they are variable, that they are volatile, so that the prices of them can swing wildly. In fact, just as the price of natural gas has done. So one of the worst things that you could possibly do is tie yourself to a fossil fuel that has that kind of volatility. Why? Because you have happened exactly what has happened in the last 3 years, Mr. Speaker, as the price of coal went up by 75%, thanks to the decisions made by the former governments, the price that went up to consumers. That's not because of anything this government did, Mr. Speaker. It's because of decisions made by past governments to chain themselves to the fossil fuel market.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard the Premier talk about finding stable power rates. Nova Scotians now know that in his world, stable means going up by 25%. We have had the Liberals now admitting they don't actually provide power rate relief, only that they too want stable power rates, which in their world means going up by 30 to 50%. My question to the Premier is if he's so sure, he should prove it. Mr. Speaker, he should prove it because power rates are too expensive and a real hardship in Nova Scotia today. But he won't prove it because he has rigged the review of Muskrat Falls to exclude the possibility of comparing it to cheap, clean, alternative sources like natural gas. And now we have an opportunity because 100 years of gas is going to flow the other way through our own pipeline through our province. So if he really believes what he just said, why not expand the review of Muskrat Falls and allow it to be compared to natural gas?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Utility and Review Board will review the project in total. In fact, there have already been significant studies that have come out that have looked at a review of the project. They come to the conclusion that it will provide Nova Scotians with cheap relative to the other alternatives, cheaper power rates and stability over the long term. Mr. Speaker, I would think that that's what the leader of the Conservative Party would want. I don't, one of the approaches that we take, which I think is the right one, is to ensure that we have a portfolio of energy, so that there is wind, so that there is hydro, so that there is access to, there will inevitably continue to be some coal in that mix, and of course there will be natural gas, as there is today.
Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, now we're getting somewhere because there should be a portfolio of energy-generating alternatives available to our province. The Premier has already hitched his wagon to a gigantic mega project, Muskrat Falls, which is a 50-year decision that this province has to make in a very short period of time. And yet he's rigged the review of Muskrat Falls because he insists that they can only look at alternatives that are consistent with his renewable energy plan. Mr. Speaker, we all admit that natural gas is not renewable, although it is very clean, although there is a 100-year supply, and although it's going to flow right through our province. So if he is so sure that Muskrat Falls is better than natural gas, why not expand the review that the URB is going to undertake at the direction of his government, expand the review and allow them to look at natural gas as a cheaper, cleaner generation source for electricity?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I just don't think the Leader of the Conservative Party understands the scope of the review. They have the right to look at any experts' reports they want. They can look at natural gas. I would just point out that Muskrat Falls supplies for us about 10% of the total portfolio that the province will have. It will have the option to be able to buy, in addition to that 10%, if it is at a cheaper price and lowers the rate for Nova Scotians, they will be able to buy the electricity that would otherwise flow through to other parts of the continent, Mr. Speaker. That puts Nova Scotia in the driver's seat when it comes to energy. It strengthens the transmission capacity. It means that we will be able to buy electricity from wherever we want without the transmission capacity associated with Muskrat Falls. We can't do that, but we will then be able to buy from Quebec Hydro, from New Brunswick, for that matter from New England, if it were available. We'll be able to take advantage of being part of an energy loop rather than being stuck at the end of the extension cord.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, on September 20, my question is for the Premier. On September 22nd, 2012, the Premier had this to say about the deal he struck to save the mill in Port Hawkesbury. And I'll table it. He said, "I'm pleased to say we now have a new agreement that is a better deal for Nova Scotians." I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, part of that deal exempts the owners from the NDP's efficiency tax that is applied to every power bill in the province. So apparently that's a better deal for them. So, Mr. Speaker, why does the Premier think that Stern should be exempt from the NDP efficiency tax when other Nova Scotia residents and businesses have to pay for it?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand, and I know at some point in time there'll be an election, and the people in the Liberal caucus will have to go to the people of the Strait area in Antigonish, in Guysborough, in Inverness, in Richmond, and they'll have to explain why, when they needed the help of the people in the House of Assembly, it was the Liberal Party that stood against them. It was the Liberal Party that said you shouldn't be investing in jobs in the Strait area. Mr. Speaker, they'll have to explain why it is that they have decided to do that. We have invested in the jobs of over 1,000 people in the Strait area, Mr. Speaker, not because it was a political thing to do, simply because it was the right thing to do.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the fact that the Premier is incapable of even addressing the question ought to speak volumes to Nova Scotians. The fact is, he will not answer the question of why he believes a multi-million-dollar company that he's handed even more millions should be exempt from a tax that low-income Nova Scotians are forced to pay. You know, Mr. Speaker, so let me ask the question one more time, and maybe the Premier will explain it to Nova Scotians. Because if he honestly believes it's the right thing to do, then he should have an answer. Mr. Speaker, why does the Premier believe a multi-million-dollar company benefiting from millions of dollars of government handouts should be exempt from a tax on power bills that low-income families and all the other businesses in the province don't have the same exemption from?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I just think it's ironic that the member can sit there or stand there and ask about the about energy efficient programs that they have committed themselves to doing away with, Mr. Speaker. The simple fact of the matter is that low-income Nova Scotians are actually the ones who benefited the most, Mr. Speaker, as a result of energy efficiency programs in this province. More than $60 million will be saved by energy consumers over and above the $40 million that was spent, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we have never once proposed eliminating efficiency programs. In fact, and I will table the statements of, Mr. Speaker, I'll even table the comments of the Leader of the Official Opposition in the last session who said we would just change it so that Nova Scotia Power has to pay the bill for the independent programs. So, the fact, I mean, the Premier is just showing that he doesn't pay attention. So, I'm going to try one more time, Mr. Speaker, because the Premier has still not answered the question. Why does he think the Stern Group should be exempt from the tax when every other Nova Scotian in business is forced to pay for it?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker, the energy efficiency programs that are promoted by Efficiency Nova Scotia were put together and recommended by an independent panel of citizens. They said there should be an independent arm's-length organization. We supported that, Mr. Speaker, and we support conservation and energy efficiency in this province. Mr. Speaker, but I can tell you one thing. The people in the Strait region, they needed assistance in order to ensure that there was going to be 1,000 jobs saved in that area. Mr. Speaker, they know one thing. If there's one person they would not want in charge in this province, Mr. Speaker, it would be somebody who would turn their back on those people.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, in its final report, the Electoral Boundaries Commission states on page 5 that they received a letter from you, Mr. Speaker, as Speaker, stating the following. The terms of reference established in the report of the Select Committee constitute the totality of direction to the Commission, and no person or body is authorized to give them further direction. That's page 5 of the Electoral Boundaries Report that was tabled in this House today. As we know, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General on June 14, 2012, actually did give very firm, further direction to the Commission, setting them down the sorry road that we see today. So my question to the Attorney General is, in light of this revelation that no person or body is authorized to give further direction to the Commission, does he agree that the further direction he provided was inappropriate?
Good question.
Honourable the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to assure all Nova Scotians that this side of the House respects and values each of them, and that their vote is worth, whether you're in Argyll or whether you're in Sydney or whether you're in Yarmouth or whether you're in New Glasgow, your vote is equal value. And when the electoral boundaries presented their report and were outside of the parameters of this House set, it was my responsibility to put forth.
Honourable member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General put his intervention and further direction in writing in a letter, and I'll table that letter. This is clearly contrary to the process outlined by you, sir, Mr. Speaker. That's right. So to the Attorney General, did the Attorney General act out of anger or arrogance, or did the Premier or Cabinet authorize this inappropriate intervention?
Honourable the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for asking that very specific question. My reply to that was on principle of morals and ethics, that each person in this province has value, that the vote stands there, and at no time was there malice or any anger. It was a matter of fairness across this province and ensuring that everyone's voice has equal value.
The honourable member for Argyll on his final supplementary.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. We're getting into Banana Republic territory here. We have one party, the majority party, deliberately interfering with an independent process. Even worse, the independent commission, whose job it is to determine the boundaries for the next election. This is a shameful and sad day for a province that is home of parliamentary democracy in North America. We now know that shame rests solely on the shoulders of the Premier, the Attorney General, and members of his cabinet. Will he do the right thing today and apologize to all Nova Scotians, particularly Acadians, African Nova Scotians, and those in Yarmouth and Shelburne counties who have had their voting rights trampled on so crossly? And for interfering with this important independent commission. Because of that, will you apologize, and will you tender your resignation today because of it?
The Honourable the Attorney General.
I want to assure the member across there that the blood in my veins comes from the same historical period that his comes from. And I want to also point out that we have fairness and equity, that each person in this province...
Please. Order. Have a seat. Have a seat. The Attorney General has the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe in fairness and equity, and that one vote is one vote.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians are worried about whether they are going to have a job or not in this province. Last year alone, 8,600 full-time jobs disappeared from our province. Meanwhile, this government has handed over $500 million in commitments to big corporations. My question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism: why does the Minister think big corporations are more deserving than Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, the member's trying to put words in my mouth. I don't ever recall saying that we prefer big business over small business. Matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it's quite the contrary. We work with all businesses, small, medium-sized, and large business. You will find, Mr. Speaker, that if you did an analysis of the number of transactions that we've done since we've been in government, I bet you, Mr. Speaker, you will find that over 80% of the people that we deal with are small and medium-sized businesses, Mr. Speaker. We deal with our responsibility is to create jobs, Mr. Speaker. We are doing that, but we aren't discriminating against the size of your business. Mr. Speaker, you know, I could tell you a story, Mr. Speaker, about Bill Did It, a company in Sydney, Nova Scotia that employs 4 people when they started with us. Small business, today they employ 6.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think that it wouldn't be fair to say that 80% of the money spent by this government on economic development is spent on small business, because $600 million of it went to 6 corporations. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, this province has a terrible economic track record under this government. Nova Scotians are already being squeezed by this government's inaction on power rates and taxes, fee increases imposed by the NDP. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that last year alone, 8,600 fewer Nova Scotians had full-time work and now face insecurity that comes with part-time or multiple part-time jobs. So my question, why would the minister celebrate the fact that thousands more Nova Scotians are working part-time with little job security while full-time work is disappearing under his watch?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can stand in my place and I can proudly say that in June, when we took over as government, to the point now, as of September 2011, we've created jobs in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. We've created over 8,000 jobs in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan. It's called Jobs Here. I said 3 years ago when we first started with the Jobs Here plan, we've got a plan, Mr. Speaker. The plan is working. We are going to stick to it.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I can guarantee that no one is celebrating the job record of this government in this province. So, despite the messages and the brochures and the commercials, no one's happy about job creation in this province. So let's get the facts straight, Mr. Speaker. Since this government has taken office, Nova Scotia has less job security, and full-time jobs are being replaced with part-time jobs at an alarming rate. However, 8,600 full-time jobs have disappeared from the province. This minister has seen fit to hand over $500 million to 6 corporations, Mr. Speaker. The result? Even more jobs lost, at a total of 1,310. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians lost 8,600 full-time jobs in the last year. We have one of the worst performing economies in the country under this minister. So my question to the minister, when will he admit that his corporate welfare is simply hurting Nova Scotians while helping big business?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, under our watch, Mr. Speaker, employment is up, unemployment is down. That's the trend that we started, and that's the trend that we trust is going to continue. You talk about jobs, Mr. Speaker. Now, I listened to the member, and maybe the member should go down in Shelburne Shipyard and make that same speech, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the member should go to Cape Breton, to Port Oxford, to Newpage, and make that same speech, Mr. Speaker. Maybe that member should go down to Aeterio in Metagan and make that same speech, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's working. We've got a plan. We're sticking to it.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. In light, I really didn't get an answer from the Minister of Justice, the Attorney General, on the process that we have all been subjected to in the electoral boundaries report, that Acadians have been ignored, the rights of Acadians, rights of large communities and geographical areas around Nova Scotia, and now of course, Minister of Fisheries, who was out on the floor of this legislature talking about the failed process. Seeing that all this has gone on, Mr. Speaker, the constituency of Shelburne now has not been, thoroughly talked to or been able to be consulted. I'm just wondering what the Premier's thoughts are on the issue of whether this boundary report is valid or not.
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Electoral Boundaries Committee, of course, submitted a report that was now consistent with its terms of reference. Mr. Speaker, I would just point out that as the terms of reference for this was being decided, it was that member and that caucus that took the position that there should be a 25% variance, Mr. Speaker. They didn't, until the very last minute, even speak out at all about the consistency. Mr. Speaker, there were some eight drafts. There were some 8 drafts, and they never ever mentioned it once, Mr. Speaker. They, in fact, proposed that there should be a 25% variance, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I believe the way that the correspondence went, we suggested 20%. It was actually the member for Argyll that suggested that the variance should be 25%.
The honourable member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's obvious that the Premier doesn't know the truth because the members, maybe his members of that committee didn't tell him the truth on that. I know I hear the Minister of Finance chirping over there talking about it as well. We know full well that when we were in that discussion, that we talked about the protection of those constituencies, the protection of Acadian rights in Nova Scotia, the linguistic rights of Nova Scotia. And that after that was taken care of, Leonard Schurz, After that, I'm sorry,
Order, please. Order, please. Referring to a member by name is improper and in this chamber at any time, so that includes every part of the debate. So I'd ask the honourable member to retract that, please.
I retract that.
Continue on with your question, the honourable member.
Thank you so much. And I know the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage was a part of our discussions, and I know that maybe he's tending to forget some of the parts of that discussion. Of course, the important part was the protection of Acadian linguistic rights across this province and making sure that those constituencies, the constituencies of Clare, Richmond and Argyll, were there to represent them in this House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, only one party wrote them off, and that was the NDP. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier is, in light of all this information, will he instruct his Minister of Justice to resign?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, in just a second, I'm going to table this. This is actually I guess it's a letter that came from from the member for Argyll. It's called the PC position on the deviation of average number of electors per constituency. He says, in regards to the plus or minus 20%, we have to disagree with you on this point. It's our feeling that plus or minus 25% needs to stay in the 2012 terms of reference. He goes on to say that this is appropriate, notwithstanding the Carter decision, Mr. Speaker. That was the position of the Conservative Party that they tabled with the thing. So, Mr. Speaker, I table it. Maybe it'll refresh his memory.
The honourable member for Argyll on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I can't imagine the crassness of this discussion. Mr. Speaker, taking that out of context is absolutely a disservice to Acadian linguistic minorities in this province. Had you been there for the discussion with the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage, the member for Halifax Citadel, he would have known that that was not what we actually meant. Mr. Speaker, there was also a discussion of cultural linguistic minorities and the protection of their rights in this House of Assembly. So for the Premier to look for blame everywhere else, all he needs to do is look over to his right, look at the Minister of Justice, look behind him, and look at the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage. Will he ask for their resignations today?
Honourable the Premier.
You know, now that the member for Argyll has been caught in his own web of deceit, perhaps he should resign.
Order, order, order. What? Order. Out. On. Gone. I'd ask the honourable member for Argyll to stand up in his place, please, and retract those remarks and apologize.
Monsieur le Président, je vais remettre ces commentaires-là. Je dis en face des Acadiens de la Nouvelle-Écosse que ce processus n'était pas acceptable. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all Acadians in this province, that we know that our rights have been taken away. And I apologize maybe for the remarks in this House, but for a Premier to say it like that is absolutely, like, I just can't believe it. I just can't.
Well, I don't think that that's much of an apology or in a sense of retracting your remarks, the honourable member. So I'm going to ask you to retract your remarks in this assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize for the emotionalness of this. This has been very difficult for many of our constituents. I'm not going to. If he's going to continue to do that...
I will ask the honourable member to retract, and if you're refusing and continue to refuse, I'll have no choice but to order you to withdraw from the House for the remainder of today, persistent to Rule 28. Again, I retract the remarks.
Mr. Speaker, I am trying to retract them, but I'm hearing lots of other comments along here. I apologize to the Acadians. I apologize to the Premier. Maybe I was a little snippy on this one. But this has been a very, very, very emotional process.
Well, that was the third and final time I'm directing you to withdraw the remarks. Please.
I retract my comments.
Thank you. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you to is through you to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, the OECD has calculated that the rate of return on investments in public education to be 8.8% for girls and 13.6% for boys, and I can table that chart. This is an impressive and unheard of rate of return. Despite this information, the NDP government has slashed education funding in this province to the tune of $65 million over the last 2 years. So my question to the Minister of Education is this: will the minister tell members of this House what research she used when she supported the NDP government's decision to slash funding to public education?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are investing in education in the province of Nova Scotia. We have had an issue of declining enrollment, and we are making sure that our investments are strategic and that our investments are going to guarantee that our children are going to be successful. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the question was what research was used. The World Bank's education strategy published in 2011 states, and I quote, "Investments in quality education lead to more rapid and sustainable economic growth and development," end of quote, and I will table that. Mr. Speaker, there is a body of evidence that supports investing in public education. This minister ignores that research. So would the minister please table the research that she used to support her government's decision to cut funding to education, something that is categorically opposed by economists around the world?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind the members of this House that this government did not take $65 million out of the education budget. I would like to also add that the per student
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The per student funding per student in this province is higher than it has ever been. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the minister to go back and do a little bit of math, because every board in this province and every parent and every member of the NSTU knows exactly what that adds up to. And over 2 years, it's $65 million. It's only two-digit adding, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Mr. Speaker, my final question. Knowing that slashing education funding cannot be supported by research, knowing that there are negative impacts from this government's cuts, they're being felt in schools, they're being felt in classrooms all over this province, will the minister tell members of this House if she plans to continue her third year of cuts to public education?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. I don't need to take a math lesson from the former Minister of Education. We know that our results in math are lagging. We are making strategic investments in this province for our students, and we just recently added 73 more teachers so that our children in primary to 3 all have classroom sizes under 25.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Monsieur le Président, je veux prendre cette occasion pour féliciter le nouveau ministre des Affaires acadiennes. Comme vous le savez, la communauté acadienne joue un rôle majeur dans l'identité de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Notre langue et culture est présente chaque jour dans des communautés à travers la province. Malheureusement, la communauté acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse se trouve attaquée par le gouvernement Dexter avec sa décision de silencer notre présence dans l'Assemblée législative. Est-ce que le nouveau ministre des Affaires acadiennes peut nous informer quelle est sa position sur la question des circonscriptions protégées pour les communautés acadiennes de Clare, Argyll et Richmond?
The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux aussi dire félicitations au nouveau président de FAN. But as the member opposite recognizes and knows, that a question around the changes to electoral boundaries definitely should be answered through the appropriate minister. We respect the process. I respect the process. So I would ask the Minister of Justice to relay any questions, but it's unfortunate that the Minister of Justice is unable to understand the question from the honourable member. So maybe I'd ask he maybe ask the Minister of Justice in English, and maybe he could provide an answer.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Avec tout respect, Monsieur le Président, je ne pense pas que c'est nécessaire quand on pose une question au nom de la communauté acadienne, au ministre des Affaires responsable pour le Bureau des Affaires acadiennes, de ne pas répondre quelle est sa position sur la question des circonscriptions protégées, quand nous avons la communauté acadienne qui nous dit c'est partie de notre culture, c'est partie de notre identité, même plus important, c'est partie de notre futur. Et je peux vous assurer, Monsieur le Président, que je ne répéterai pas la question pour le ministre de la Justice, parce qu'en fin de journée, les Acadiens regardent le ministre responsable pour le Bureau des Affaires acadiennes. Et alors, je demande de nouveau, est-ce que le ministre des Affaires acadiennes peut nous dire quelle est sa position sur la question que la communauté acadienne a identifiée comme partie de leur culture, leur identité et leur futur? Ça, c'est la présence de les voix acadiens ici dans l'Assemblée législative.
The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je peux dire une chose. L'Office des Affaires acadiennes travaille pour tous les résidents ici à Nouvelle-Écosse qui sont acadiens. Juste pas dans les communautés Argyle-Clare, mais aussi aux communautés Pomquet, Arishat, les communautés de Truro, la communauté de Halifax, où on avait la plus grande communauté acadienne ici à Nouvelle-Écosse. On travaille beaucoup avec tout le monde dans notre province, avec les services dans l'Office des Affaires acadiennes, et je vais continuer de travailler avec tout le monde. Les résidents d'Argyle, les résidents de Clare, les résidents de Richmond, les résidents francophones et acadiens, tous dans notre province ici à Nouvelle-Écosse.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Monsieur le Président, cette question ici, ce n'est pas une question du futur du député d'Argyle ou du futur du député de Clare ou du futur de moi-même comme député de Richmond. Pendant le processus, les Acadiens à travers la province nous avons dit que les députés acadiens de Clare, Richmond et Argyle ne représentent pas juste leur communauté, mais ils représentent la totalité de la communauté acadienne à travers la Nouvelle-Écosse. Monsieur le Président, ce serait un rêve d'avoir un député de chaque communauté acadienne, mais ce n'est pas possible. Mais maintenant, l'Assemblée et le processus que nous avons suivi pendant les derniers 30 années nous a assuré les voix des Acadiens ici à l'Assemblée. Alors je demande une dernière fois, est-ce que le nouveau ministre des Affaires acadiennes, quelle est sa position sur la question de les voix acadiens assurées ici dans l'Assemblée législative?
The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est très important pour notre parti, l'NPD, la partie de libéral, la partie de progressive conservative, doit travailler beaucoup avec notre membre, de travailler avec tout le monde qui est francophone, tout le monde qui est acadien ici à Nouvelle-Écosse. C'est notre job, c'est mon job pour les ministres des Affaires acadiens. Je parle et je travaille avec tout le monde ici à Nouvelle-Écosse qui est francophone, qui vient des communautés acadiennes. C'est important pour moi de continuer. J'allais, je pense, vendredi soir, la conférence for FAN. C'est important, on continue de travailler avec FAN, avec d'autres associations ici à Nouvelle-Écosse. Donc, c'est mon job assis avec mes collègues de cabinet pour faire les investissements pour toutes les communautés, tous les résidents ici à Nouvelle-Écosse, qui est français, qui est acadien. Merci, monsieur.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. The bill for the ads. Oh, wrong, sorry. The classroom cap has increased under
Order, please. Order. The time allotted for the time allotted for questions by members to minister has expired. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, I rise on a point of order. During question period, the Premier made comments in regards to the work of the Select Committee for selecting the Boundary Review Commission. In his comments, the Premier seemed to indicate that by supporting a 25% variance, somehow the PC party or anyone else was, in essence, working towards eliminating Acadian representation. Mr. Speaker, the Premier would know, in the first two previous independent commissions, the terms of reference had a clause that said, notwithstanding the 25% variance, that in cases of linguistic, cultural, or geographic size, that the Commission may go beyond the 25%. Mr. Speaker, the decision to remove that notwithstanding clause was one made uniquely by the majority NDP members of that Commission, and to suggest anything other than that, Mr. Speaker, I believe would have been misleading the House, which is what the Premier did with his comments.
It's not a point of order. It's a disagreement between two members in the House of Assembly. It's a disagreement between two members. No. The Honourable House Leader of the Government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call address and reply the speech from the throne.
Address and reply and speech from the throne. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville. Well, I know, but I mean, waiting and waiting. All right.
No.
Well, there was nobody else standing up over there.
Thank you very much. We'll defer.
The honourable member for Bedford, Birch Cove, on reply from the speech from the throne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry for the confusion. I saw the member opposite standing up and thought that it was the government's turn. So, as most of you know, I come from the riding of Bedford, Birch Cove, which is composed of two communities, Bedford and Birch Cove, which historically haven't always been linked. In fact, previously the riding was called Bedford Fall River. I think there was Bedford Musquodoboit before that. It's been a variety of different, we've been linked with a lot of different communities. We have a pretty diverse riding in terms of who lives there. Initially, Bedford started off, and Birch Cove. We were sort of cottage country for Halifax dwellers, but over time we became suburban areas, and in Bedford's case we actually had a lot of industry at one time. We had a paper mill, hence the name Paper Mill Lake. We had a number of different industries. We had a fish hatchery, etc., etc. Over time, though, those have given way to a more suburban character to the riding. A lot of the time lately, on Fridays or Saturdays, I go out door knocking in my riding just to find out what people think. Sometimes I have, an item of interest to drop to them, and other times I just go with a survey asking, what are your top 3 issues of provincial importance? And I thought I would talk about those particular issues here today, the kinds of things I've been hearing at the door in Bedford, Birch Cove. Now, one of the things I've been hearing a lot about is the $65 million cut from education. Initially, I think parents weren't all that concerned because there seemed to be, it seemed to be quiet. But what we're hearing what we were hearing late last school term and certainly this school term is a lot of concern around the impacts of those cuts. And you know, $65 million is a lot of money, especially in it's been especially difficult in my area because my area is growing and we see schools bursting at their seams. Even, we have a new high school being built, and that high school is being built for 1,200 students. There are already 1,300 students registered at the high school that's going to move over there. So you know what's going to happen. And yes, I understand that high schools can often take more students than they're built for because not everybody is there for every class. But you have to ask, if there's 1,300 kids already registered at Charles P. Allen High School, what is going to happen when we see even more kids crammed into that in the next few years? And we've been hearing conflicting messages. I was actually at this school earlier in October. I actually got to go for a tour. The new school is coming along nicely. It's ahead of schedule and it's on budget. And so I was in there, and it's a great facility. I am concerned about a number of things, one of which is, of course, the size of it, because unless there is a call for proposals, and unless a planned new high school for the Ravines is accepted by the province, this school will become rapidly overcrowded, and all the benefit that the kids who have been crammed into the current CP Allen, all the benefit that they have had over the last number of years will be lost. All the benefit from getting a new school will be lost simply because they don't have the kind of space that they need. So that is a concern. And there's also, one of the things we wanted to do at that new high school was build a theatre. There is no theatre in the Bedford-Sackville area, and we had hoped to be able to do some fundraising and to build a theatre. And we were told that we could not fundraise for capital projects, that anything like that would have to be done in conjunction with the municipality. And in the end, you know, we tried to fight against that. We didn't get anywhere. So instead, the municipality has done an area rate, and we're going to have some upgrading to the cafetorium, and we're very pleased with that, although it's not, you know, what we initially wanted, certainly. And now we have an issue of a shed, and it's half built. Half has been built by HRM, and half is sitting there with a pad. And oddly enough, the school was approached by HRSB to fundraise to build this capital project. And we're saying, how can this be? Wait a second, we were told we couldn't fundraise to build a capital project, a theatre, and now we're being told we have to fundraise to build a capital project, a shed. That seems kind of bizarre to us. So I'm really hoping that one of these days we'll actually get an answer out of the Department of Education. I have asked the minister, and I got an answer back that they didn't seem to know what was going on. So I would love to have an answer back from the minister about this. Are we supposed to fundraise? And if so, why could we not fundraise for a theatre? And why are we sitting there? I went out the other day. The field is beautiful. The field is AstroTurf, paid for by HRM taxpayers, I might add, and there's half a building there, and then there's a concrete pad. They're sitting next to this half building. It's kind of bizarre looking, and I guess they'll have to put up a little extra fence while we sit around and try to figure out what the heck is going on with this $70,000 shed. And again, you have to ask yourself, why is it okay to fundraise for that and not for a theatre? certainly one of the issues that I do hear at the doors is the issue of education and class overcrowding. And recently, we heard about some new teachers that are going into schools, and they're very welcome. But the problem with the way that was done, the problem with denying that there was a problem, is that suddenly schools that were already bursting at the seams are even more crowded because you've added another classroom. So, for example, in one of the schools in my district in Grosvenor Wentworth, what we have there is we have a teacher who, the music teacher, who is now going from class to class with a cart. And you say, well, you know, that's too bad, that's so sorry, whatever. But the problem is, he actually uses his Yamaha piano to teach music. And he can't shove that thing from classroom to classroom. And it's an example of no planning and no leadership on this file. This should have been dealt with before the summer, because the fact of the matter, pardon me? Actually, the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville was very quiet when we discussed the shed. And I'd like to hear what he has to say about the shed and the missing half shed at Charles P. Allen High School. So if you'd like to talk, by all means, I'd like to hear your answer. So I guess we're not going to hear anything on the shed. Back to the school. What should have happened is that portables should have been put in there. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. So at the last minute, we have teachers coming in overcrowded schools because there was no plan. We had a good idea of the numbers who were going to be at schools before September. We didn't have to do it. No, not we. The government didn't have to do it 3 weeks into the term. It could have been dealt with. It should have been dealt with. Instead, we had a last-minute, demi-derriere plan to deal with this. And you have to ask yourself, is that quality education? Parents are concerned. When I go door to door, you know what I hear? They say, I can't believe that we're spending the second lowest of any province in the country. And then when I tell them the reason it's only second lowest and not the lowest is because all the program funding that once went for things like math mentors and reading recovery has actually been moved over, has been cut totally, and that's been moved over. If that hadn't happened, we would be at the rock bottom. Recently, the government, with great fanfare, announced that they were going to import the Alberta math curriculum. And because Alberta's math scores are much better than ours. And people were saying, well, that's great, but the problem is it has to come with the kind of funding that Alberta gets. You can't just walk in the door and say, we've got Alberta's curriculum and not give the kind of funding to get the results. There's no, the other day I met with a businessman in Bedford, and he said, I'm so concerned about the kids that are coming out of school. They're lacking basic literacy skills. And this government is setting these kids up to fail because they are not getting what they need to be able to succeed in life. If you can't read directions on a manual, if you can't read directions on what pills you're supposed to take, how are you supposed to get through life? These kids are coming out and they are not equipped with what they need. And there's lots of kids who will do just fine no matter what school system you put them in, they will shine. But there are kids who need extra help and they are not getting it. And the parents of kids with disabilities tell me how very disappointed they are by the kind of education they see for their kids and by the pulling of supports for those kids. Also in my riding, what I hear about a lot is power rates. And that when I was going door to door, that was something that was brought up to me sort of, I guess it was, I started going door to door in the winter, so that's not surprising because it's very cold and we're all putting out a lot of money for heat. And I actually was writing to a constituent who had written to me, and I was telling him, you know, there's a petition going around, you can get that. He's got that petition, he's going door to door with that. He's pretty steamed. Yeah. So Nova Scotia power rates are a huge issue, and certainly they are a big issue. We know that. We're seeing the government actually start to move by, in a lot of cases, taking the things that we've been saying and actually moving on those and bringing in legislation around that. But consistently, when I went door to door in the winter months, what I heard was this was one of the top 3 issues. And the other issues might change. In families with younger children, there was education in there, but in house after house after house, whether they were young or old, single person or a family, the cost of power was a huge issue. And I think what was kind of frustrating about question period today was that we saw the Premier completely misrepresent our plan. And now I should have come to expect that. But what I would urge the members to do is take a drive down to Berwick and check out what happens in Berwick, because they produce some of their own power there. And this is the kind of thing we're talking about. It's a town producing some of its own power, and rates there are 10% less than they are down the road. And I don't know what is so scary about this for the NDP, but it works. I don't know why they think that this is a problem, but it's worse. It works, and it's 10% lower in Berwick than in neighboring communities. What is so scary about that? In Bedford Birch Cove, health issues are also a concern, and certainly what we've been hearing over and over again are wait time issues. I know a young woman who has knee problems. She's trying to get in to see a specialist. It's been months and months and months and months and still no appointment. She needs surgery. She can't do the kind of job she normally does because she can't stand for long periods of time. In Bedford Birch Cove, Lyme disease remains an issue. In fact, on Monday night, together with the Bedford Residents Association, I hosted a showing of the movie Under Our Skin, and I would urge the members of the NDP caucus to watch this movie. It's an hour and a half long. It's kind of long, but it does chronicle sort of the paths of a number of chronic Lyme disease sufferers as they travel through their road to recovery, and at the same time you see what's happening with their doctors, and at the very end it deals with the medical community and how Lyme disease has been treated in the United States and who is actually treating. Who is making the decisions about that? Because one of the concerns that the movie highlights is that a lot of the people who are making the decisions about how Lyme disease is treated actually have conflicts of interest. And they should, to give them that kind of power to decide on whether Lyme disease is a chronic condition, etc., if you're employed by an HMO, for example, is not right. And the problem is we're taking those treatment guidelines from the United States and we're bringing them up here to Canada. And so the result of that is we are following some concerning trends in terms of the way that we treat it. And I would urge, I wish the health Oh, I guess I can't say that. Yeah, I can't say that. I would urge the health minister to make sure that he reminds Nova Scotia citizens that Lyme disease-bearing ticks are still active until there has been several days of temperatures below at 4 degrees or lower. So, for example, last winter, we had a winter where Lyme disease, where the onset of winter was quite late. And the result was we had Lyme disease-bearing ticks active quite a bit longer than you would normally expect. So I would hope that the health department will be proactive this year and issue a warning to Nova Scotians to remind them that, you know, they are, that ticks are still active. I would also hope that they would let Nova Scotians know that it's not just in the endemic areas that you have to worry about Lyme disease-bearing ticks. You have to, basically, the ecosystem of the province is such that you can find a tick on you outside those areas. Those areas have expanded. There's a map that's on the Health and Wellness website that shows where the endemic areas are, but the fact is those areas are growing together and ticks can be found across much of the province. I was visiting a doctor in Cape Breton not long ago, and he indicated to me that in fact there are Lyme disease-bearing ticks in Cape Breton, but there's no indication on that map that that's the case. And he has seen cases of Lyme in people who most likely contracted it in Cape Breton. One of the concerns that I hear from my constituents is that a number of them have been forced to go outside the province for treatment because the treatment that is the standard here in Nova Scotia and across much of Canada is a simple course of antibiotics. And if you just get antibiotics for 14 days, you likely will not be able to shake the Lyme disease. Most Lyme disease experts actually consider a 30-day course, and again, you have to catch it at the right time. It's a very complicated disease. It's not easy to treat. One of the most concerning things I've heard from constituents about Lyme disease is the number who've actually told me that they were told that their Lyme disease was all in their head. They'd had an initial treatment, and they would seem to get better, and then they would get worse again. Now, if you know how the Lyme disease spirochete works, it's like a syphilis spirochete. It's kind of like a corkscrew. And what happens with those spirochetes is when they're being attacked by an antibiotic, they actually will sometimes put sort of a protective, trying to think of the word, almost like a shell around them, a ball around them. And so they'll be protected for about 30 days, and then they will rehatch and the spirochete's out there again. So you can't just say that one treatment will treat everybody, but that's in fact what a lot of Lyme disease patients are being told. And it's, I can't tell you the number of people who've said to me, you know, first of all, it was actually a relief to know what they had when they had it. When they were finally diagnosed, because they thought, oh, I'm going to get treated, and then to find out that, you know, they get one treatment, and then when they go back for more and say it doesn't seem to be gone, I've got the same symptoms back, they're being told it's all in their head. And it's not in their head. And to be told that, and it particularly seems to happen to middle-aged women, which I think there's been a history of them being told that things are all in their head in the first place. So I don't like hearing that when people are coming to me and telling me about their experience. So I would urge the members of the government caucus to watch that movie, Under Our Skin. It is American, so there are some things that are different, but I would urge them to get it. I think it's actually free online this particular week, so you may be able to get it that way. If not, if you'd like to see it, I could certainly arrange for you to get it. As I indicated earlier, long wait times are a huge issue in my riding. So is a lack of adequate housing, and you would think that in an affluent area that wouldn't be an issue, but the fact is it's really difficult to access affordable housing in this province. We have 1,800 families on the waiting list for public housing at this time, and my concern is that in a lot of areas, like mine, we have apartment buildings going up, and those are lovely apartment buildings, but they're luxury apartment buildings. And I wonder, I often think back to when I was widowed in the early 90s, and I think, what if I had to actually pay for housing and childcare and food and heat and clothing out of my salary? What if there had been no insurance? What would I have done? I don't think I could have done it. And I had a very good job. I was a television director with a CTV affiliate. I don't know how I would have made it through, and I don't know how single-parent families make it through today. And certainly we're seeing rents. What I was hearing today about rents here in Halifax climbing, and I can tell you that in Bedford, Birch Cove, they're climbing as well. Sort of an odd segue, but one of the things we are seeing are a lot more condos in our province, and there are some condos that currently overlook the Bedford waterfront. And the Bedford waterfront has become quite a hot button issue. For the members who don't know about this particular project, back in 1985, the Bedford Waterfront Commission approved a project to do some infilling along the Bedford waterfront, and that would provide a number of different things for Bedford. And the first phase, we had some townhomes, we had some low-rise apartment buildings, one sort of slightly higher rise, and we got DeWolf Park, and we have some jetties, etc. And that's been a real addition to Bedford. Having that park on the waterfront where citizens can gather, etc., has been a huge boon. Fast forward almost 20 years later, and there is concern building around what is going in at that waterfront. Actually, the day after I was elected in 2009, there was a public meeting where the Waterfront Development Commission, which has sort of taken over Bedford Waterfront Development Corporation, it took over Bedford Waterfront Development Corporation. Anyway, it unveiled 3 plans, and I was at that meeting. There were probably, I think, about 150 people there, and I think there was a lot of positive feedback that night about what people saw. But I think part of that was because there were 3 plans. It wasn't a final plan.
The chatter is getting a little loud, so we keep the chatter down, because the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove has the floor. So we could keep the chatter down. That would be really good. Thank you. The member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that night, there was a lot of positive comments, or I guess maybe it was an afternoon. Anyway, I remember it being very light. It was in June. And a year later, when the final proposal came down, that night, it wasn't as positive. Now, part of that was, again, I think because you have a number of the options eliminated. But it was a really dense plan. And while there was more green space than there actually was with the DeWolf Park plan, it didn't look like it because there was no sort of central gathering point. The green space was dispersed. There were a lot of boardwalks, etc. And so you know, that was sort of the first thing I heard. But there was also the density issue. And one of the things that you know, I'm hearing a lot is concern about density in Bedford. A lot of the development is happening in Bedford. A lot of it's in Bedford West, where I had a chance to door knock this summer, and what a nice community that is. It's really coming along, and I had a good time out there. And those folks were very happy to remain as part of the Bedford community and not be hived off to another riding. But with the new plan for the Bedford waterfront, there's a lot of buildings on there, and there's a lot of concern. You know, where's the park? Where are we supposed to gather? That kind of thing. So earlier this year, a group, well, I guess it would have been last year, a group called Save Bedford Reef started up. And now they were concerned in particular about Crosby Island, which was slated to be part of the original infill as decided by Bedford Waterfront Commission, and the ledges that are next to it, they're concerned about those being infilled. And so I started meeting with them and asking questions and things like that. Since then, some citizens who are concerned about sort of the level of development have met with them, and they've joined together to create Save Bedford Waterfront. So they will be, well, they have indicated that they would like to meet with the Premier, and I wrote to the Premier, and I was hoping that he would say, yes, I'll meet with you, because they want to stop the infill there. 39 acres of peritic slate is a lot. It's a big area, and perhaps some of the concern around it is because we're just looking at this big expanse. It's sort of a moonscape right now, but that's any development plan has been stopped just because HRM has engaged in a traffic, transit and services study. So everything is sort of frozen while that's going on. And then there will be another year of consultation in terms of the development. But that's municipal, that's not provincial. What these folks are concerned about is the infill. And do we have to infill that much? I can tell you that I've heard from sailors who've said to me, you know what? You're infilling in my playground, and I don't like this, and I didn't agree with it. So earlier in late September, there was a public meeting at the Legion where members of Save Bedford Waterfront Committee and the public had a chance to explain to the Waterfront Development Commission how they felt. Unfortunately, it was on a night when I was in Cape Breton, the Member of Parliament was in Ottawa, and the local councillor was actually chairing community council that night, so he wasn't able to come. But members of the community had their chance to say, you know, what they were concerned about there. And I would urge the government to pay attention to this group, because you can only, you know, keep trying to pour so many people onto a small road like Bedford Highway. I mean, anybody who drives out to Bedford on Sunday afternoons knows we've had a lot of development there, and that road is not equipped to handle a whole lot more. So if there is going to be limited development down on the waterfront, and I hope it would be no more than limited development, but certainly we are hoping to have that theater that we didn't get at the high school, or a library, or a ferry terminal, or a train terminal there. But if that's going to happen at that waterfront, you know, you don't want a whole lot more density going up down there. We want to see places where people can be active and we can get together. Because I can tell you, DeWolf Park has been a huge boon to Bedford, but it's getting really crowded. When we have events like Canada Day or Bedford Days, it gets really crowded. And so there is a need for another, you know, sort of big venue park in Bedford. Now, that's not to say we don't have facilities in Bedford, because we do, and not to say that we don't have facilities in Birch Cove, because we do. We have a wonderful facility in Mascua on Kearney Lake. And of course, that, as I mentioned earlier today, Mark de Jong won a bronze medal this summer, and Mark is from the Mascua Club. And I can tell you, I was there the night we did the big send-off. The leader of the opposition and the member for Halifax Clayton Park were both there as well, and we were pretty excited to be part of that evening, to see Mark as he headed off, and Amy Cotton was there too. A wonderful young woman who was heading over in judo, and we were pretty excited that night. And the night of the semifinals, in fact, the federal member for Halifax West and I went over early in the morning to see that. Went over to see that race, and people were so excited about that. Some of those kids slept overnight, and then they got up at 5:30 in the morning to watch Mark race that morning. Now, I have to say that we didn't actually go over at 5:30 that Saturday morning, but we were up to watch the race. And that was so exciting, you know, sitting there at the end of the race, waiting in anticipation, wondering, did he make it? And he did, and he brought home the bronze. And I'll tell you, we were there for the end of the year barbecue, and people are still on a high from that win. And I think that it will have a huge effect for young people, getting them to enjoy paddling even more, to see someone that they know from around the club, and Mark is very approachable, to see that was so nice for the kids and for the parents and the supporters at Mascua. We also have in my riding the 4-pad, the BMO 4-pad, the rink, which has made a huge difference for families that play ringette and hockey. It has been a huge boon to have that facility. And you know, I have to say kudos to HRM, who bore the vast brunt of that. For some reason, the federal government refused to put any money in, and provincially we only put $2 million in. So HRM taxpayers built that rink, and it has been a huge boon to our area. When I was talking earlier about education, I should have mentioned post-secondary education, because that is a big issue in the riding as well. It's a very middle-class area, so a lot of parents are encouraging their kids to go for post-secondary education. And as we all know, the cost of post-secondary education continues to rise. And it's a big concern to those parents when they see that $100 million has come out of the universities around this province under this government. They know that money is going to come from somewhere, and it may well be them. And they know that the education their kids are getting at the universities here in Nova Scotia is top-notch. And in fact, I got to attend a graduation this year as my second daughter received her degree from St. FX. And that was a pretty proud day, considering she had overcome a brain injury to really get stellar marks and graduate with her psychology degree. But a lot of parents are struggling with the cost of post-secondary education. And it is tough to say when parents come to me and say, you know, my kid has graduated and they have $30,000 or $40,000 or $60,000 in debt, and they can't find a suitable job. They can't find a job related to their field of study. And so what are they going to do? They're going to go down the road. And, you know, so often I'll run into friends and I'll say, you know, how's your son? How's your daughter? Well, they're out west. And I would hate it to be said of Nova Scotia that our #1 export is our young people, but boy, it sure does feel that way. And the graduate tax credit that this government instituted that's supposed to keep them at home, I'm telling you, is not doing its job. And studies that have been done in other provinces that have looked at it, that have implemented it, are pretty clear that it doesn't do the job that we want it to do. So again, not sure that that is a plus for families who are hoping to keep their kids here at home. So when I look at my riding, I think it's a really prosperous place. But when I go over the last couple of weeks, I've talked to a lot of small business owners. And it started off as just sort of a chance conversation with one business owner who's been in business for 20 years. And he said, honestly, this has been the most difficult year I've ever had. There doesn't seem to be the kind of disposable income that there once was. And he said, I don't know anymore. He said, I thought it was just me, but he had sent a staff member off to a course on social media. And when this staff member came back, she said, you know what? All the businesses in the same industry as us, they're all saying the same thing too. So that started me thinking. So I started, popping in at a retail operation and talking to builders and just checking in with different people in different industries. And I kept hearing the same thing over and over again. The money isn't there. People are tightening their belts. They're not spending their any discretionary money. And I think that it may in fact be the result of the HST hike a few years ago, because if you suddenly have that increase in what's going out the door, you may not notice it right away. And maybe you just go through your savings a little bit. But when everything is going up, when you have gas going up, when you have electricity going up, when rent is going up, eventually it has a cumulative effect. When tuition is going up, when clothing costs more, and we heard that during the winter, clothing costs more. When all these things add up, it's making it harder and harder for people to make ends meet. And I think if people wonder, am I going to have a job tomorrow? They're not going to be spending any discretionary, they're not going to engage in any discretionary funding. They are going to be guarding their pennies. So when I look around my riding, I see a prosperous riding, and I see some really neat people. We have a lot of immigrants in Bedford Birch Cove. Some of the schools that I go into, there are many, I think one of the schools I went into, I think it was Bedford South, they had 50-something languages being spoken. I didn't even realize there were that many languages that existed. But there are huge numbers of immigrants here. And if we want to keep immigrants here, we have to have jobs. And I'm concerned that without jobs, thank you very much, without jobs, we are not going to be able to attract and keep immigrants. And Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for offering me this time right now to have this, to speak about my riding. I'm very proud of my riding. I hope that what we see at the Bedford waterfront is going to be a gem, not just for Bedford, and there will be development as well in the Birch Cove area, but again, that is under study as well. But I do hope that when the government comes to look at the infilling question, they will meet with this committee and they will look at what comes out of the consultations and ask themselves, do we really need to infill? I know there was a concern, what do you do with that Purdick slate if you're not putting it in the basin? But our caucus met with Irving last week, and Irving indicated they're going to do a big infill for the shipping contract. So I let them know that there's Purdick slate that we'd be happy if they took it off our hands, and so maybe that will help. But Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for affording me this time, and I would like to thank the members for listening.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't even know where to begin. There's so many things I can talk about, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville thinks he has the floor.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I didn't chirp when that member over there was talking, and I asked the same respect. Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate, you know, that I'm standing here and listening to the things that are being said across the way. There are a few things that I'd like to address, and I'm only going to stand on my feet for a few minutes today, and hopefully have the opportunity to continue at a later date. But I can tell the people that I represent in Hammonds Plains, the families and the students and the community members who will be attending the new C.P. Allen High School, that they will be getting the shed that the honourable member from Bedford Birch Cove was talking about. My community has asked for that. I have been championing that, and we're getting that. Good MLA. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that the honourable member from Birch Cove never mentions, actually the Liberal Party never mentions this. They never mentioned the fact about the wonderful P3 contract that they signed when they were in government.
Bad memory.
Now, Mr. Speaker, do you know that the part? Do you know? Okay, so that's an interesting
Order,
point.
please. Order. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville has the floor, and he requested there be no chirping from any side of the House. Well,
absolutely, I agree, Mr. Speaker. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that the member from Yarmouth mentions that he was 9 at the time. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? I think I was 8 at the time. But do you know, because of the decisions of the Liberal Party, do you know how much more money we are spending because of that botched system of P3 schools? $20 million more today because of the decisions of that Liberal Party.
When he was 9.
Do you know the other thing, Mr. Speaker? That doesn't even include the amount of money that when this party is in power many years down the road, by about 2019, 2020, we have to make a decision on whether or not we have to buy those schools from that developer. That's the decision we have to make. We have to we would have to make that decision. And so, do you know, Mr. Speaker, what the other interesting part of that is, do you know how much we will have to pay for those schools at that time? The exact same amount that we would if we were to build a school. The exact same amount if we were to build a school. That is how much we will have to pay. What they did is they delayed payments. They wanted to make it sound like we're getting, you know, the province at the time, we're getting all these new schools, Those communities got those schools. Those communities deserved those schools. Absolutely. Those communities needed those schools. Do you know those
Order, folks. Order. Order, please. The honourable, the member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville has the floor. We got another half hour, folks. Let's try to make it through it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So that's the reality that we're at. Those communities absolutely deserve those schools. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? The government of the day made the decision to delay the payments of those schools, adding another $20 million today. That's how much more we're spending today because of the decisions of that party across the way. You know, Mr. Speaker, what that shows is that that party is not up to the job. They are not up to the job. They are not up to the job of doing anything but sitting on that side of the House.
That's right.
The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about the great new school that was being built by this government, the replacement school for C.P. Allen High, which is being built along the Hammonds Plains Road off Innovation Drive next to RIM that we all see when we're on going down the By High. That, Mr. Speaker, it's not a P3 school. That school is a $38 million state-of-the-art facility, gold LEED standards, the most environmentally friendly school in this province, will be.
Good member.
And Mr. Speaker, that school was originally estimated to cost about $34 million. $34 million by the previous government. But the previous government didn't take into the fact that they actually had to buy the land. Oops. Oops, what's the big deal? So, the community comes together, which is a great process. The community comes together, as I know the member from Queens will know, when new schools are being built, the community comes together and decides the site. They recommend 3 sites. The site that made the most sense is where it's being built. And Mr. Speaker, this government invested another $4 million to buy the land. $38 million school, Mr. Speaker. A $38 million school for the community of Hammonds Plains, for the community of Upper Hammonds Plains, for the community of Bedford. And Mr. Speaker, that is a good decision that this government has made. But the party on the other side is not up to the job. They are not up to the job, Mr. Speaker. Liberal governments for the past 20 years helped create the mess that we're working to clean up. That party over there, Mr. Speaker, that party over there will promise anything to anyone. Will promise anything to anyone, Mr. Speaker. Anything to anyone. So how are they going to pay for it? Mr. Speaker, is my question. I just don't know how they're going to pay for it. It's unfortunate. So the question that the party opposite hasn't answered yet, the party opposite has not answered this. Again, as I said, they're promising all of these things that really we don't know actually what they're promising, but we kind of get a sense of where they might be going. But you know what? I can probably assume, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that the Liberal Party, if they had their way, and they don't, Mr. Speaker, but if they had their way, they would get rid of the affordable living tax credit. Would they get rid of it? I think they would. So that's $70 million that's going into the pockets of everyday Nova Scotians that they're going to take back from them. They're going to take it back from them. The other thing they would do is they would more than likely take away the poverty reduction tax credit, which is $3.6 million back into the pockets of Nova Scotians. Increases to income assistance, which was $17 million back into the pockets of low-income Nova Scotians. They'll take that away from them as well. Increases for child benefits, they would get rid of that, Mr. Speaker, and that's $12 million. $12 million they would take away out of the pockets of Nova Scotians. Seniors, for the income tax reductions, the property tax reductions, Mr. Speaker, that adds up to about $15 million that they would take away from Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, the caregiver program is $5 million. $5 million that they're going to take that away from Nova Scotians, that they were taken away from it. And Mr. Speaker, the other thing they don't talk about, is how is that party?
Order. Order, please. 30 minutes. Let's just bring her down a little bit and get through this first day. Make Nova Scotians just take a deep breath. The Honourable, the member for Hammond Plains, Upper Sackville, has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that
we have the Honourable, the member for Yarmouth on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the member from Sackville's Hammonds Plains is leveling a lot of unfounded accusations at this caucus. So all I would ask is that the member opposite provide any sort of documentation that can help prove his point. Because, Mr. Speaker, you can't just make things up in this House of Assembly and expect people to believe it. Table the documents then. Table the documents. If you believe it, table the documents. Table the documents.
that's right.
Order, please. Order. 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 That is not a point of order. That is a disagreement between two members. The Honourable, the member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville, has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The document that I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker, for the Honourable member from Yarmouth is called the budget. It's called the budget. It's tabled every year. That's the document I'm talking about. So anyways, Mr. Speaker, I know that it's the first day back at the House, and I understand how important these issues are to everyday Nova Scotians. I very much look forward to taking my whole hour that is able for me to speak on behalf of my constituents to ensure that we set the record straight between this party and that party. That party on the other side of the House is certainly not up to the job. Mr. Speaker, I move adjournment for address and reply.
There has been a motion to adjourn debate, and is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today. We will now ask you to rise, and we will meet from the hours of 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And after the daily routine, we will be doing Bill 94, 12 noon, did I? 12 noon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's 9 a.m. to 12 noon, and Mr. Speaker, we will be, after daily routine, doing Bill 94, 97, easy for me to say, huh? 94 and 97, so I ask the House to now rise to meet at those hours tomorrow, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The motion before the House is that we now do rise and meet again tomorrow between the hours of 9 a.m. and 12 noon. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? We are now adjourned. We have now reached the hour of interruption. The late debate for tonight has been picked under rule number 5. Therefore, be it resolved that the NDP government takes stronger action to ensure that as many Nova Scotians as necessary access the heating assistance rebate program. And it was submitted by the Honourable Member for Kings West. The Honourable, the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very interesting topic that has been brought up by my colleague from Kings West. I know in my own area we have a tremendous number of people that take advantage of this very important program, the Heating Assistance Rebate Program. And unfortunately, each year since this government has taken place, there's been a substantial amount of money left in the budget each year. And I'll just give you an example. In 2009, there was $4 million left in the budget. 2010, there was $4.4 million. And again, in 2011, there was $4.4 million. Now, probably the main reason for that was that when the NDP government come to in place, there was a $450 rebate per household, and they did in turn reduce that down to $200. And you see the down to $200 now, and that made a difference in people's lives. Now, when you look at what this government has done to hurt families with the tax increases they put in place, with the GST going up by 25% increase, provincial share of the GST is up 25%, and you take away $250 out of a program, and you still have a surplus. So what do you do with a surplus? Well, it looks like they handed it over to $560 million over to big business. So what we're saying on one hand is we want to help Nova Scotians that need it most, and this program is a very good program, this heating assistance rebate program, where it allows the people that can afford the least to buy the heating fuels that they have to get the money back, or some of the money back they have to pay in that essential service in this province. Instead, they took that $4.4 million, turned it over to big companies, and what did that result in? 1,200 lost jobs. 1,200 lost jobs. And for every job we've lost, well, you paid $47 million. $47 million for every job you lost in the province. That's pretty interesting. But yet you can't give families in this province, the families that need it most, the low-income families, the families on guaranteed income supplement, another $200, $250 like it was when it originally was put in place at $450 instead of $200. And they don't even make a really strong effort to make sure that everybody's aware of this thing and they indeed get the benefit of the least the minimum $200. Now, $200 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it is a lot of money. If you've got a choice between heating your home or buying groceries or paying your power bill, that's another issue we'll be talking about in great length as time goes on here. But to pay your power bill, all the essential things you have to do, never mind paying your rent, paying your insurance, and paying the other things that you need to protect yourself and look after your family in this society that we live in today. So you see, on one hand, the government runs a surplus in this program, a surplus, approximately $4.4 million. On the other hand, they take that $4.4 million and give it to big business. What big business do? They cut 1,200 jobs in the province. So is this a good investment? The $200 a month and $450 would be better. I mean, $200 a year and the $450 would be better, really help the people that we've seen. We have people now coming into our office, never like we had before. A lot more people coming in looking for this program because they're suffering. People are really suffering under this government. As the taxes go up, all the fees have gone up. All the fees have gone up. Their income tax has been bracket crept every year, so that's gone up. And this GST that's gone up 2 cents. So 2 cents doesn't sound like much, but that was a double-digit tax increase put on by this government that said they wouldn't do it. 25% increase in your GST. 25% increase. That's a lot of money. And Nova Scotians don't realize that it was 25% tax increase. That's a double-digit tax increase. And as they become aware of it, they become shocked and understand then why they don't have any money to spend, why they can't pay for the power, why they can't pay for the essentials they have in life, and why they so desperately need any program that's in place to help them. And what's also happening, a lot of people are leaving the province. All our young people are leaving. I've talked to many of the contractors in the area that are still in business here, and a lot of them have closed up, but the ones that have, they can't find anyone to work. They can't find people to work, because why? Everybody's moved to Alberta. All the young people have gone to Alberta. You ask why that is the case. Well, number one, they make more money there. Number two, they pay less tax, and they get a job. You try to get a job in this province now. The businesses are cutting back. The Economic Development Minister was proud of the big job he did today, that he had 4 people working in a business, and he got 2 more now. That's very important. You need 10,000 businesses doing that, and then you're making progress. But if you only got 1, that's a very poor example. So as you see how the government can't even run a program like this and make sure that more money is put in the hands of the people that really need it. The people that can use this money to, again, buy groceries, help with their heating bill, pay the power bill, pay insurance, whatever they have to do to make sure that they're surviving. Pay the rent, or help pay for the maintenance on their home if they're lucky enough to have a home. So when you look at programs like this, They're very important to Nova Scotians, very important to our economy as you move forward. We have to help look after people, our low income. We have so many people now that are retired and don't have the disposable income that they probably should have had. They didn't save when they were working. Most people don't. And when you see what happens to them, and you see the stories and hear the stories when our constituency office of the people that worked hard all their lives and contributed a tremendous amount to our communities, and they don't get the benefits of what they should get from our government. And again, after cutting this from $450 down to $200, and then there's a surplus in the budget, I think that's a crime. And it should be corrected. It should be corrected immediately, and we should be able to see benefits to families. Even if it could spend the other $4.4 million, even if it made $50 more a year to an individual family that needed it, even to put up to $250 instead of the $200 they cut it back to, it would make a difference. Because every penny counts now for families. Every penny counts. You're seeing people now that aren't buying the things they used to buy. You go out on the highways. I know in my area, I go on the highways, and the traffic used to be horrendous late in the evening when it's coming back from meetings here or other meetings they would have, and now the traffic isn't as busy as it was. That's an indication that people aren't driving as much. They can't afford the gasoline. The tax on gasoline is killing us and killing our province, killing our economy. You know, when you look at the things that this government has done to actually destroy the economy in this province, we got the worst economic record in all of Canada. Now just think about that. If you've got the worst economic record in all of Canada, there's a reason for that. And that just happened since 2009. 2009. And just so happened at the same time that the NDP got elected. So that's no coincidence. It's just no coincidence. This government doesn't know how to create a job. They know how to throw money away. Absolutely throw money away. No innovation whatsoever when it comes to helping create jobs or create an environment for business to operate and thrive. Because if you can't get business in this province to operate and thrive and make money when you're paying your people a reasonable wage and work safely and do all the things that you should be doing, people aren't going to come here. They're not going to set their business up here. All kinds of businesses have moved just as far as Moncton. They can service Nova Scotia from Moncton. So when you see that happening, that means usually very highly paid jobs that go from here simply to Moncton. That helps Nova Scotia, doesn't help Nova Scotia's economy, but it sure helps New Brunswick at our expense. And we can't allow that to keep happening. We've got to make sure that our Nova Scotia business can be competitive. So you give them the highest power rates, highest tax rates, highest everything, highest fee rate, and all the other things that are so detrimental to running a business. And who did all that? This government over here, this NDP government did that. And when you think about that, I just ask the families out there, if you wonder why you don't have the money to buy the groceries you had, you don't have the money that you used to have to pay your oil bill, to pay your electric bill, and pay all those things, you remember before 2009, you could pay those bills. Today, you can't. And you can't because these people on the NDP government have made it impossible to survive in Nova Scotia and raise your family here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We now recognize the honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to speak about the important heating assistance rebate program. And we all know it's a program designed to help low-income Nova Scotians pay to heat their homes. And I want to let the member opposite know that we hear regularly from people who have received this most important rebate, and they tell us frequently that they appreciate the program and that every bit of this assistance helps them and their families make ends meet. As we know, Mr. Speaker, higher fuel prices are a global concern, and Nova Scotia here is no exception to those global fuel prices. And through initiatives like the Home like the heating assistant rebate program, our government is indeed helping lower income Nova Scotians who are struggling to make ends meet and to heat their homes. The heating assistant rebate program, also known as HARP, Mr. Speaker, was first launched in October 2008, and our government was quick to recognize that it wasn't meeting the needs of many Nova Scotians who were struggling to heat their homes. So we actually increased the threshold for income earners. So single persons with incomes of less than $27,000 and families with incomes of less than $42,000, as well as Nova Scotians receiving income assistance or the guaranteed income supplement were and are eligible today to apply. Our government also, as soon as we were elected on this side of the House, our government removed the HST off of all home heating, and that alone, with the extended threshold, has, which I must add, the member opposite and his party voted against. The HST removed off of home heating and the rebate actually works out to be roughly $400 in assistance to those eligible Nova Scotians. The program, Mr. Speaker, is application-based, and everyone who applies, Mr. Speaker, must have paid some form of heating bill to qualify for this most needed rebate. And Mr. Speaker, if I can table for the members of the House an application that SNISMAR sends out to members, and it's also handily put inside an envelope which is postage paid, so it's a very easy application to fill out, and with that postage prepaid, applicants don't have to worry about that extra that cost. Mr. Speaker, our government also have made improvements to help more people, and the program now covers all forms of home heating, and that is to ensure that we are helping as many Nova Scotians as possible. Mr. Speaker, in 2010-2011, the province has helped about 50,000 households throughout Nova Scotia, and last year the uptake increased, and we are now helping more than 51,000 Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, our government does know how important it is to get the word out about this program and making sure that all Nova Scotians who need to access this will get the assistance they need. One of the most significant ways that we reach out to Nova Scotians is by sending the previous year's recipients a pre-populated application to make it easier for them to apply for assistance should they still require it, Mr. Speaker. Every Nova Scotian, I want to stress, Mr. Speaker, who received a rebate last year will receive one of those pre-populated forms. On Tuesday, October the 23rd, we sent out more than 51,000 of these pre-populated applications to ensure Nova Scotians do indeed get the help that they need as early as possible for this 2012-2013 winter season. Mr. Speaker, we also make sure that the applications for the HARP are available online. They're available at all Access Nova Scotia centres, at all Department of Community Services offices, and at all MLA offices. In fact, members of this House should receive their applications as early as this week. We also send out, Mr. Speaker, applications to more than 100 community groups throughout the province, including Feed Nova Scotia, the Parker Street Food and Furniture Bank, Family Resource Centres, various seniors organizations, and farmers markets. Also, Mr. Speaker, along with these efforts to reach out to Nova Scotians, we put in inserts in income assistance recipients' checks to help them learn about and access the very important heating assistant rebate program. Income assistant caseworkers also receive applications to give to their clients. Efficiency Nova Scotia receives copies of the application, Mr. Speaker, and staff are available to work with all Nova Scotians to help them make their homes more energy efficient. We always advertise, Mr. Speaker, the Heating Assistant Rebate Program when it begins in the fall, usually in late October or early November. In 2011, Mr. Speaker, we advertised the Heating Assistant Rebate Program in print and on radio, in French and in English, online, and after receiving some strong criticism for not doing all we could to get the word out about the program, we advertised HARP on television, Mr. Speaker. In just a few weeks, we will once again advertise the Heating Assistant Rebate Program to get the word out to Nova Scotians who might need this help. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we sent out a press release announcing the 2012-2013 program. And it is our hope that media will help us get the word out to all of those Nova Scotians that need assistance with their fuel costs, Mr. Speaker. And while we didn't see any of the coverage today, it is our hope that indeed media will help us spread the word. And Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage all members of the House to do whatever they can to get the word out. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that that's something that's very important to the MLA office in Queens. And my office, what we do is we follow up on those applicants from last year to ensure that they do know that the rebate is available to them this year. And in fact, I just received from my assistant earlier today that she sent out on my behalf 4 applications today, Mr. Speaker, to constituents who had contacted my office looking for those rebate applications. And another thing we do is my MLA office partners with other MLAs along the South Shore, the member for Lunenburg, the member for Lunenburg West, and the member for Chester St. Margaret's. And we regularly will put out service announcements to our constituents jointly to advertise this very important, or not advertise, sorry, Mr. Speaker. We communicate with our constituents to let them know that this very important rebate program is available. So you see, Mr. Speaker, we here take this program very seriously. We want to make sure that all Nova Scotians have the most updated information on the application when it's available and what the criteria is for them to apply. Mr. Speaker, it is a good program and it is a targeted initiative that helps thousands of Nova Scotians every year, and as I indicated, 51,000 have applied for this very important program. We also work closely and have a partnership with the Salvation Army through its Good Neighbor Energy Fund. And last year, we contributed $800,000 to that fund, Mr. Speaker. This program runs from January to April, and it is administered by the good people of the Salvation Army. So as you can see, Mr. Speaker, our government has a number of programs in place to help Nova Scotians stay warm. And these range from rebates to helping make homes more energy efficient. And it's through initiatives like the Heating Assistant Rebate Program that we are committed every day to helping as many people as possible stay warm through the cold months, Mr. Speaker. And we do everything that we can to ensure Nova Scotians are able to find out about government programs and services such as this that can help make life better for Nova Scotians and their families, Mr. Speaker. And in doing this, we always want to ask for our colleagues' help in getting the word out because at the end of the day, this program is benefiting Nova Scotians who truly need it, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member opposite for bringing this important topic to the floor tonight. And I thank you for allowing me to share my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise here this evening to speak on this late debate on the topic of therefore it be resolved that the NDP government takes stronger action to ensure that as many Nova Scotians as necessary access the Heating Assistance Rebate Program. Mr. Speaker, I heard the member opposite there urge the rest of us in this House of the Legislature to make sure we get out as much word of this as we possibly can. And Mr. Speaker, I'll guarantee you that my office has been putting these applications out left and right, and actually my assistant called today to see if I could get more quickly because my office is running out. Mr. Speaker, last winter, more than 51,000 Nova Scotians received this heating assistance rebate program, which offers eligible applicants a rebate of up to $200, which only fills about a quarter of an oil tank. Mr. Speaker, that's down from over $400 from years gone by. This government slashed that program in half when most Nova Scotians need it most. The amount of 51,000 individuals using this program, Mr. Speaker, shows the hardships that these citizens are facing in order to keep themselves warm. People have lost their jobs. There are working poor out there that need this rebate, that need this assistance, and the government slashed it in half. Mr. Speaker, households with net incomes of less than $42,000 a year and individuals who make less than $27,000 who purchase oil, natural gas, wood pellets, propane, electricity, or coal qualify for this rebate. Now, Mr. Speaker, I just heard the member opposite say that government organizations such as Community Services receive these applications. Well, I got a call from Community Services office in North Sydney that they didn't get their applications this year. So we had to make a call to the government to make sure that happened. Mr. Speaker, these people rely on this rebate to put some kind of heat in their homes. And right now, when the weather's starting to change, it's important that we get that. Mr. Speaker, we also have people in Cape Breton who rely on coal to heat their homes and hot water for cooking and cleaning, etc. But, Mr. Speaker, we found out this year that there'll be no availability of domestic coal to supply individuals in Cape Breton to heat their homes this winter. So I took it upon myself to write the minister to find out if we could get help with these individuals. And his reply is what we should try and get the coal ourselves through Nova Scotia Power or DevCo, because they get coal for BCBC because they get coal for DevCo pensioners. Mr. Speaker, I'll let everybody know that we are in negotiations now to get this coal available. If we're not successful in getting that coal, some people are going to be left in the cold this winter. Mr. Speaker, it's an expensive change to go from coal to oil, and people who burn coal, especially in an older home, like the heat they get, but they can't afford any other form of heat. To say that people qualify for this rebate is a great thing, but the people have no supply of domestic coal, the rebate's not going to help them one little bit. We asked for help from the government, and we were told basically to find our own. Mr. Speaker, some of the residents of my constituency weren't happy with that response. I understand there's a moratorium on strip mining. There's lots of coal in Cape Breton. There's coal in Donkin. And we're not putting anything into developing this resource. We're also told it may take up to 6 weeks for completed applications to be processed and eligible Nova Scotians to receive their rebate. Mr. Speaker, it's getting cold now, and this time could be an eternity for some Nova Scotians. The NDP promoted the HARP program through a $245,000 ad campaign. That's over 1,200 families that could have benefited from a little more on their rebate or received the rebate. With electricity rates rising over 27% in the last few years, there haven't been any corresponding increase in the rebate. They've actually cut it in half. There's no formula to find the most beneficial amount to provide the rebate. Wouldn't it make sense for the household income barrier to be higher than twice the single applicant barrier? It would make sense that if two people are applying together because there may be children in the home, that would increase their need for heat and power.